to the untrained ear, this probably sounds like some really good camshaft sounds going on here, but this is bad. This is a $6,000, $6,500 engine under the hood of this car, and it was dropped off with me because it's just not right and the fella couldn't figure it out. So today, and boy, let me tell you, it's pretty messed up. We're gonna get to the bottom of it, fix it, and then he can finally have the car he always wished he had. So with that, my friends, let's jump in. It's a real shame. This should be a 500 horsepower engine, but you can tell just how much it's struggling. We're gonna start a little data log here and take off from a stop. You can just see how bad it is, but we'll look at this in a second. So, tow into it a little bit here. And it's literally so rich that we can't even read the air-fuel ratio. There we go. There's something we can read. So that'll be interesting. This is a really nice car, so it's a shame, you know, backfiring and whatever it's doing here. I don't know if any of you guys struggle with this. There we go. Back when I was a kid in the summer of '79, garage door openers actually worked. It idles super lean, cruises super rich, all sorts of bad. Suffice it to say, should probably get this thing, ooh, a little bit of run on there, get this thing straightened out before it eats its third engine, and that would be a real shame. Now, normally I don't work on other people's vehicles, but for this one, I'll make an exception. This is my good friend Lee, and I just kind of got worried that he got scammed on this whole deal. This is a $6,500 engine, and it's never ran right from the moment it's put in. Now, this poor guy has this is the third engine that's been in this car in under 10,000 miles, and it is not right. So today we're gonna figure out what's going on. Is it mechanical? Is it tuning? We're gonna see on the log file here when we jump in that it's pretty whacked out, and if we didn't do anything to correct this, this engine would very quickly destroy itself. So let's have a look. It's pretty wild. And we're going to go to graph log file. Here's that log that we took, and we're pretty far away from the connection there, but there we go. It's going to generate our log file. So you can use a phone, but for the sake of video, you can actually copy this data key, and then you can throw it up on a computer and really look at it. So you can use it on your phone, or if you want to populate it on a computer, you know, you have that option too. And just so I don't get thousands of questions of how to do this, so there you go, data key right there. You're going to go to the Carb Cheater web page. So, you know, it'd just be your home page there, scroll down, and then you would put it in here, and it saved it for me. So there we go. We're going to hit enter, and it's going to pull in this same graph from our database. Now, all that data logging stuff is just free with Carb Cheater, but that's not what we're talking about today. We want to actually use this to figure out what we want to know. So about 45 seconds here, I just changed the time frame, start time, end time, 45 seconds. And so just look at this. This is so rich. So what this shows is it's going off the chart lean, but it is so rich that it's actually not burning the fuel and then completely misfiring. And it's no surprise that this engine is so incredibly sluggish. What you're seeing there is it reads as lean. It's completely barred out lean, but in reality, it is so absolutely rich that it's misfiring and not even combusting that cylinder charge. So the oxygen that's drawn in the fuel, it's not even getting really burned, and it's being read as actually lean. And so, you know, the little O2 sensor, it's just like, there's nothing I would normally read here. It's just oxygen, because it's literally misfiring. It's no surprise this thing is so incredibly slow and runs so poorly. So getting down to business here, everything on this engine is entirely new, from ignition, all the internals, carburetor intake, everything is brand new. Now, when I look and see an Edelbrock, the very first thing with an Edelbrock you want to do is look and see what the fuel pressure is when the engine is running. Now, I've looked and I know it's too high, but it's hard to get mechanical fuel pumps that put out correct pressure. Now, I see that a fuel pressure regulator was installed, but it's still much too high on the fuel PSI, and on an Edelbrock that does not have adjustable needle and seats and floats, that will really mess them up. So before we do anything else, we want to get just the basics squared away. Now, tuning is not that hard. I'll argue that I'm not that smart, and I've been able to be pretty proficient at this as long as you work through this stuff in a linear manner, which we're going to show you how to do it today. It's super easy and anyone can do this stuff. It's not black magic like everyone likes to act like it is, especially those guys that like to charge you money to do it. So anyway, I got the adjustment nut loose on the jam nut rather, on the regulator. So let's fire it and get our fuel pressure halfway decent. So we'll snake on in here, and oh boy, arms aren't long enough, which is surprising because these are some long sons of guns. All right. Sounds like garbage. We'll do the regulator thing here quick first. We're up at 6. We're gonna not put our hand in the fan. We're gonna loosen this regulator adjustment, and you see it's bringing our fuel pressure down. All right, that's something we can work with here. That's at least something that we can live with for now. And just to really show how much it stinks in here, if it looks like I'm crying, it's because I am. And this was all from it being lean, the amount of fumes and things. You know, lean doesn't burn correctly just like rich, and it puts off a lot of fumes. Like I said, a lot of folks think lean is rich, so they'll lean it out more and more, and they can never get it tuned in. So there you can see we're at least somewhere decent where I feel like we can shut it down and we're not gonna smoke the thing just trying to go through it. But fuel pressure is good, and well, we can at least work with where we're at now. Now I know Lee, and myself included, was worried that there is something fundamentally mechanically wrong with this engine, but the more I get into it, the more it just seems like a bunch of tuning things and just things that people might not know. You know, the fuel pressure with the Edelbrock is a big one here. Now you saw that I just tried to adjust the mix screws so it wasn't so super doggone lean, but I'm gonna make a little witness mark. You'll see why that helps with what we're gonna do next. But I just wanna run these all the way in and then back out the same amount of turns, because I don't know with what I was starting with if it was even. I just worked with what I had. So we're gonna go around the horn once, around the horn twice, and then around the horn a half, and we're going to do that on both here. So that's once, twice, and then a half. So now I know we're at least starting somewhere where these are relatively even. And all I'm trying to do here is get a fundamental starting point. Too many times guys are adjusting this, going over here, going over there. You need to get a good baseline before you can do any real tuning, which we haven't even done yet. This is just the process of getting the baseline. It's easy, but you just have to use your brain. This is the same stuff that people pay other people thousands and thousands of dollars to do for them when it's a super easy process. So we're gonna fire the car. Oh, and look at that. We're on the path to righteousness. You can actually hear the cam. We haven't even done any real tuning yet, but at least you can hang out in the garage without melting your eyeballs out, so that's probably an important first step. So we got our timing light hooked up here, and you can tell it's a timing light by the way that it is, but this is pretty wild here. It's a dial back timing light, so we're at 25 degrees on the light, and right now it's lining up with the TDC mark. So that means that this engine is idling right now with 25 degrees of timing, and that is with vacuum advance is disconnected. We'll get to this in a moment, but it's got a lot of other things going on. But that is a ton of timing, and there's something wrong. Now, aside from timing being absolutely extremely excessive at 25, where, once you get into the RPM and that advances, and there's no limiters on this at the moment, you'd have 1 million degrees of advance. I was looking for anything else that could be weird why someone might have done that, and it looks like they did the whole thing where they removed the resistive lead, which is important because this is a Pertronix Igniter 3 module. It's supposed to have a full 12 volts basically from the battery through the key. Fords, they generally have resistive leads. This one would have from the factory, but they did a good job removing that. So what I'm going to try and do is drop it down to 15 or 18 degrees, somewhere in that range. That seems reasonable for the cam. We're going to watch our RPM and things and make sure it's not doing anything weird, but I can't see any reason it could actually start running rough because there's too much advance, and they might have been doing that because the carburetor was all whacked out. Get our distributor loosened up here so we can adjust it and not put our hand in the fan, ideally. So your handy dandy 8/16 wrench, there she is always handy for that. Now this is going to be a fun one here because this comes into the ported versus manifold vacuum discussion. Now, people try and say, I do it this way, I do it this way, and it comes down to fundamentally the makeup of the engine itself. Now, most street cars, I highly advocate for not putting a big ridiculous cam in, something that is in the RPM range of where you're normally using your engine. That makes a lot of sense. Now this is, for what it's going to do, probably quite a bit over-cammed. And so it wants a lot of initial advance because of that big cam. It's not efficient at idle, and it's much more efficient and in time at high RPM. You're giving something up down low to get something up high. But because of that, it's inefficient down low. The burn time is essentially pretty slow. So it needs to ignite that cylinder charge sooner so that the flame front can fully propagate across the cylinder at the right time in the cylinder stroke. So this is the transition point when you would be using manifold vacuum. Now, with manifold plugged in, we're at about 28 degrees of initial timing. Now, obviously, when you hammer on it, that vacuum advance drops out, but this is a transitional point. You saw it right there. Once an engine starts asking for more than 20 degrees of initial mechanical timing, that's kind of where I start to make the transition to manifold vacuum. That's just hard to crank over at that point. And when you're cranking, you don't have that manifold vacuum advance. And when it fires, then you have all the advance that you need. So with that, we're at 18 degrees mechanical. We wouldn't want to advance this like crazy, to have like 25 degrees initial mechanical like it was. And now we're going to want to recurve this thing. Now, all you Uncle Tony fans are going to love this because we're going to set this car up his way. It's not his way and the other way isn't my way. It's all about what the machine is built to do and what it's set up for. Myself, I'm more of a road warrior. I deal with folks that are road warriors like Power Tour, and I set stuff up for that and build stuff for that. Now this engine, by all rights, should probably be in a drag car, and old Uncle Tony that's kind of what he's into. And so this is built more his style, so his way is going to make a lot more sense here. It's not his way, my way. It's just, again, set up for what machine you're dealing with. So we're going to want mechanical timing to come in very quick on this, all in relatively soon. And then we're going to want to limit that total timing so we don't put a hole in a piston. So good times. Now I could leave the stock springs in this distributor, but I'm greedy. I'm going to put one of the lightest springs in there. The problem with using two of the lightest springs is if you drive your car enough, those light springs just wear out and you start floating timing. That's why I don't like to do it, but we can blend one with the other. We're at 18 degrees initial, and on the Pertronix here, which is kind of goofy how they number them. So it has 24 degrees in it, mechanical unrestricted. So then the 10 and 10 is actually just limiting it to 20, 8 and 8, and you got to do math. What the heck is that? 16, and 6 and 6 is 12. So quick calculator brain. We're at 18 degrees initial, and so what I'm going to do is use the 16 degrees or 16 limiters. And what is that? 34. I think that's going to be decent with this engine. There could be more, but that is playing it safe, and it'll have plenty of performance. There they are, all installed. Goofy little things, you know, but they stop the weights and the whole mechanism from rotating as far as it would otherwise if they weren't there. So we're good and limited. Our timing is going to come in a bit quicker, and I think that's going to make for, you know, a relatively decent starting point. Distributor's back together, air filter is on, so now we can finally get a baseline for where we're at with this car, where it's not trying to eat itself alive, which is important. A lot of guys would call that tuning. I just call that getting started. Starts nice. Already improvements. This is a pretty nice car. God dang. Even the, what do you call this? Trunk glove box. Oh, the glove box light even works. Where did this car come from? It's just like absolutely immaculate. And this cam and this engine really needs a stall. We're idling at about, you know, 1,000 RPM or so. Down to about 600. Cam sounds cool, but I don't love that. All right, with decent timing now, we'll start a data log file and see what she does. I still expect it to be pretty rich. So, and there's a truck behind us, so we're just gonna hammer it. Infinitely better. And there's a ton left in this engine, so big difference. Still really rich, but we're not going completely off the charts. Power brakes leave something to be desired with this low idle vacuum, that's for sure. Night and day better though. A lot of guys would call this good, but I know we can get even more out of it. So we'll do another data log here. We're cruising right now at 55, and so I'm just gonna slowly roll into it. So this is the enrichment circuit, pretty rich, and then we'll really hammer on it. I mean, it's tolerable in the power. Everything, cruise is very rich, but in the power, it's only slightly rich, and that's my turn, and oh God, these brakes don't work super good. Boy. Okay. So I pulled up our data log here from our last run, and again, you can put it into the computer if you don't want to look at it on your app. So you know, you put in the data key, and really I don't care about all this. So you can kind of look at the timestamps down here. And so to 45, I only care about the first 15 seconds really. And so here we are. You can hover above stuff and see what's going on. So we're cruising. This is like a dead steady cruise. And you can see that we're pretty rich. So the red is the AFR, and we're cruising at about 12.5. And again, if you're not sure, you can just hover over it. So, you know, making okay vacuum. AFR is pretty rich. That's not really where you'd want to be cruising. Now you can see we kind of tow into it, and this is about the best data log pull you can make. It just tells you a lot. 55 mile an hour, and then roll into it and hold it at full throttle for just a little while. So that's what we did here. And so you can see right where the secondaries came open, it blipped lean momentarily, but we're going through and we go into hard throttle, and then we are really, really rich, you know, 11, but fundamentally not near as rich as Cruise. So we're going to take that info and apply it to selecting our metering rods and our jets, and we can make a pretty good tune out of this Edelbrock carburetor. Now, of course, this Edelbrock is fundamentally rich across the board. You can see that I do a little bit of Edelbrock tuning. I got some stuff circled, and that's because this is pretty typical. When you hear folks say Edelbrocks run great right out of the box, that's because they're very forgiving. You know, this rich thing that you're seeing, that's what everyone sees, and that's why folks say, well, they don't perform as well as a Holley, and Holleys are harder to tune. But that's actually just because Holleys are less forgiving out of the box, but in hard throttle, they're usually a little bit better. And Edelbrocks are more forgiving, but again, you can't have your cake and eat it too. When they ship it to you, you know, they get better. I understand why they do it. They get better reviews because you bolt it on and it will run. Is it going to be the most efficient thing? No, but that doesn't mean it's a bad carb. I love Edelbrock carburetors, and with the little tuning kit here, man, you can really dial them in and make them sing, and that's what we're about to do. Now, some folks have trouble deciphering this, but it's generally pretty easy. Now, this one is stock, so we want to bring everything leaner. You have power up top and cruise down below. That's hard throttle, and then cruising, of course. And so we need to fundamentally phase shift this whole thing, and that's pretty typical for an Edelbrock when you get into tuning. So these are all going to be in a line. So for enrichment, they're essentially hard throttle. They're going to all about be the same, but for cruise, 8, 3, and 4, those are step functions leaner on the cruise. And that is the beauty of an Edelbrock over a Holley, is the enrichment. And cruise you can tune independently. So that's a pretty nice piece here. So I say we're going to shoot for option 3. So for option 3, we have them picked out. So that was Jet 392 is what they're going to be stamped. And then the rods are going to be stamped 6852. And so if you get your little tiny squinty eyes on, you can actually read those, which I'm still young enough to do it. Otherwise, you need a magnifying glass. Now, unfortunately, in the case of this Edelbrock scenario, we have to take the top of the carb off to change both the jets and the needles. You just have to do the needles. You don't have to take the top off. But in this case, we got to change the jets. So, show you a little handy dandy trick to make it a little easier so you don't have pressurized fuel going everywhere. So we're going to refire the car. It's good and heat soaked, so no pump, nothing. Let's see what happens. Starts up okay, which is a huge improvement. Can't say I'm a fan of the mufflers that are on this. I'm kind of a straight piped or glass pack kind of guy. All right, so you're going to take your little clamp here, go into your fuel line, and just clamp it off. You'll immediately see pressure start to drop. And frankly, oh, and there it really goes. Frankly, I just let it kind of run for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then I know I'm not going to be contending with fuel. I just kind of want to let it run out and see what happens. It's amazing how long a pretty sizable engine can run just on the float bowl. As the fuel level's dropping, it's leaning out until she's all done, just like that. Now to pull the top, you got 3 clippy-do guys. Basically, you just look for linkages that attach between the base and the top. So there's a couple over there, one over here, and then once we pull all these screws out, we should be able to just kind of lean it out of the way, which is probably wishful thinking. With the top bolts out here, your linkage unhooked, and your center stud out, the top of the carburetor comes right off real easy. It looks intimidating, but I promise it's really a simple process. The worst thing is leaning over the fender, and if you're an old man like me, now you have a broken back. Now you really don't want to goof around when you're taking these jets out. You want a screwdriver that fits it pretty darn close, and so you can see the primary jet up front there. Side note, I think the gas tank in this car might be a little rusty, so Edelbrock kind of plans for that and has a... It's always good when you hear something hit the floor, but anyway, we'll want to clean all that out, and I probably want to find that jet. If you've ever worked on an Edelbrock, you'll know that this is what success looks like. It does always pay to have where the engine just ran, where the carburetor is kind of hot. The thermal expansion of the aluminum is quite a bit greater than that of the brass. So on a hot carb, they seem to come out much easier than on a cold carb. Jets are in. We're just going to drop the cover back on here. You don't want to force anything, so it goes down nice. And it always helps to have your needle assemblies out when you do this, because they have to go right into the jet perfect. And that's just a whole lot of stuff to line up, and we're going to change them anyway here. And of course, under your little flappy-doo guys is your springs and needles, so that's kind of what they look like there. I've already changed them over. There's just a little clip, and it's real easy to do. So you just want to make sure that it's nice and free-floating when you spin this cap over, and you're good to go. Once you're all buttoned up here, you can just release your restrictor here, and you heard the fuel jump on into the carburetor. You don't want to take this off until you're totally buttoned up, or else you're going to have a little bit of an event. I'm sure it won't fire right off because the bowls are pretty empty. Or it will. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, what do you know? Fundamentally better. You'll have that when it's not completely flooding itself. All right, so here we are cruising at 55, and we're at 13.5 instead of down at like a flat 12 or 11.5, so that ain't bad. I don't know if you guys can tell in the video, but it's a whole lot quieter cruising down the road at like 55. And really, that's what you should expect. The closer you get to an efficiently tuned engine, honestly, the quieter it will be, which I know we're all kind of sad about that, but trust me, when you hammer on it, it'll still be plenty loud. We're going to turn our log file on here. We're just going to pull out, and it doesn't have a kick down, unfortunately, so we got to catch it on the front end. It's mildly horrifying in this giant bathtub boat looking thing. All right, we're back at the shop. We have our data log pulled up here from our last run. And this is, again, where you're starting to cut with a razor blade instead of an axe. You know, if you're trying to read plugs to figure this out, you'd never get there. This is the stuff that they do on dynos with cars and everything. But we'll take a look here, and we're going to have to get pretty creative with our tuning. But we'll be able to do it because we can see everything going on. Makes it pretty easy. So here we are from our last pull there, speed, RPM, you know, we're like rolling at, you know, I don't know, maybe 10 mile an hour. And then we hit it and we actually go, it trips the lean deal here where it's not lean, it's so rich, it's not reading, which we'll look at the accelerator pump in a moment. And also when the enrichment circuit comes in, which would be the actual springs you put in there. But once we get down to maintaining AFR, so, you know, we get through all of the initial kick-in of stuff, which we'll get to in a moment, but we're still coming down here. We're at least reading on the chart, which is good, but we're at about 11, which is pretty rich, still leaving a lot of power on the table. We come over here, lift, and then, you know, this is like your steady state cruise, you know, 52 mile an hour. And so, you know, that's about 13.5. So again, we need to take all of this and phase shift it up a little farther. Now we're about to go outside of the typical, just kind of the suggestions. They're not the only things you can do, but it just kind of gives you an idea. But they do supply you with much more than what's on there for the more adept folks. So unfortunately, because this car is so weird, that's what we're going to get into. Now again, the needle or the rod assembly goes into the jet, and it has two different sized OD restrictions on it. So cruising is up here and high load is down here. Now that corresponds to the numbers on the rod stamping. And so your number on the left is your cruising restriction, and your number on the right is your hard throttle restriction. So the bigger the number, the leaner it's going to be. And why these are really nice on the Edelbrock is you could take something like this. See, these are a 6347 and a 6337. Now, the 63, they're going to cruise at the same AFR, but the 6337 is going to be richer under hard throttle than the 6347 because the 37 is a smaller restriction than the 47. So that's kind of the background, and then, you know, you can, once you understand that, you can really dial this stuff in. So right now I have option 3 in there with the 392 jet and the 6852. So let's just say I changed rods and put the 7052 in there. What that would do is the high load would stay exactly the same, and that would phase shift the cruising AFR leaner, closer to 14. But we kind of need to phase shift both of these. And when we're doing this deep tuning stuff, it always helps to write down, you know, your graph reference number. And so if we navigate away, we can always pull this back up by putting in this number and then our jet and our rod and kind of what that looked like there. So we can always go back and reference. So naturally, another round of this, removing jets and changing the rods, and we'll hit the road again. Seeing what a little kind of casual, polite 0 to 60 run would kind of look like. So we're just going to get out here, slowly roll into it. We're not so slowly. That's 60. That's 70. That's 80. Okay. And I'm telling you what, we're getting really close. This thing is cruising. Very, very nice, good clean AFR, hardly in the pedal. You can see we got a lot more vacuum going down the road. So man, it's like a completely different vehicle right now. And dude, keep in mind, this is a stock rear gear in this thing, okay? It's a 3 flat, 9-inch. And so even if this had 325 or 355, this would just be insane. This is one of the faster boats that's just, you know, casually drivable that I've been in a long time. I'm kind of curious how accurate the speedometer is, so we're going to try and get it to 60, and we're 60 over here, so it's like everything is pretty stock after the engine. From the bell housing forward, it's probably a little excessive, but I don't know. You only live once in life. This is the type of stuff out in the boonies you gotta be careful of. We definitely don't want to get into that. Oh my goodness. I just replaced the batteries in this son of a gun. I tell you what, it ain't like when I was a kid. There we go. That is so irritating. Technology just ain't what it used to be. Clearly this engine is no slouch, pulling up the log file here from getting on the road. So you can kind of see if we can get it to focus. And you know, you can just look at this from your phone. You don't have to do anything with a computer. So, you know, we were starting off just creeping in at 10 miles an hour, and then we kind of hammer onto it. So here I see that, you know, we blip lean, so we can probably richen up the accelerator pump a little bit. And then, what are we, 10 miles an hour? And if you look down here, you know, this is about the 9-second mark. We hammer onto it. And then what are we doing here at the 18-second mark? So within 10 seconds, we're going from, you know, 10 miles an hour. And we just rolled into it. We didn't even hammer on it. We're doing 83 miles an hour, you know. So this thing can really move out pretty good for what it is. This is a massively heavy vehicle, stock rear end. That's just wildly impressive. But everything looks good, a little accelerator pump change. And at this point, I think, you know, I haven't even hooked in any carb cheater stuff, but it's all dialed in pretty good. So at this point, we can hook this up, and we should be good to go. I think we got a pretty darn good tune on our 390 FE. And side note, this is why I've never loved automatics for hot rods. Look where it's shifting, about 4,000 RPM here. You know, what could this engine do if it actually ran up to 5,500 like it's capable of? But, you know, unless you're manually shifting it, the transmission's kind of in control, you're just a passenger. But I mean, that is amazing. It can pull that off with shifting as early as 4,000 RPM. All right, everything finally officially plumbed in here. So here is our auto tune assist valve that's going up to the front of the carb. Our map sensor was previously there. I just had the whole roll of vacuum lines stuffed over here. So the map sensor goes to the back, and then I moved the PCV to the front where it's supposed to go, just so it blends better with the incoming stream on the primaries with idle and things. And do you have to do that technically? No, but to me, it just makes more sense. So I rerouted that from how it was previously when it showed up here. Now, some of you more astute folks have probably noticed that we haven't had the auto tune assist on in the upper right there on the carb cheater while we've been tuning it, and that's because we want to get it dialed in pretty good and then let carb cheater handle the day-to-day. Now, I'm sure you just saw there, we're down in the 13s now. It's warmer outside, underhood heat is different, and so this is the point where we can enable that auto tune assist feature, and it's going to handle all this day-to-day stuff for us. And I know I say it a lot on here, but the carburetor is really solid, but at the end of the day, it's a static metering device in a dynamic environment. So now with Carb Cheater, we can use its dynamic, or its capabilities rather, to give that otherwise static metering device dynamic capability. Now with everything installed, cruising down the road, nice and clean, everything's running good. I think we're in pretty good shape.